Welcome to Battle Tested with Tanya Acker. You certainly know my next guest, Michael Corriero from Hot Bench. He and I worked on that show for several years together. It was really fantastic working with this man. I will tell you that. You may also know that before making the foray into television, Michael was a judge in New York. And when he sat on the bench in New York, he was really an advocate for making the juvenile justice system more responsive and more efficient in dealing with young offenders. What you may not know is that Michael himself had an experience with someone who appeared before him that actually tested his own faith in the system, but that also gave him an opportunity as a member of the system to keep the faith and keep his word. And I think in a moment where we have become so used to people not keeping their word and breaking their faith and breaching our trust, it's good to be reminded that there are still those who will fight the fight to do the right thing and to stand by their word. That sometimes is a big battle in and of itself. I will let Michael tell you all about it. Thank you for joining me, and please don't forget to subscribe. The one and only, the great Michael Corriero is here.
My dear colleague.
Michael.
I miss you.
I miss you too. Thank you for being here, Judge.
It's my pleasure, my honor. I just so much enjoy your conversations. There was a wonderful scene in The Last Samurai where Tom Cruise is embracing The Last Samurai and says, I will miss our conversations. And I do miss our conversation. Maybe they were in the form of deliberation, but nevertheless, I miss them. And I miss you.
I heart you, so, Michael Corriero.
Thank you for inviting me on Battle Tested. I think it's an apt name for a tremendous advocate who really inspired me as well. So I'm glad to be able to share some of my ideas and thoughts with you and answer your tough questions, because I know you always have them.
It's like our days back in the deliberation room.
Yes.
But different. Yes. I will say this, and I mean it very seriously. I've worked with lots of different people, and obviously not just on Hot Bench and Tribunal, but throughout my career, I've worked with lots of people. I have had great professional and community experiences with people. You, Michael Corriero, are one of the best colleagues I have ever had anywhere in my life. You are gracious, you are graceful, you are elegant, you are sharp and determined, and we didn't always agree on our verdicts all of the time. We certainly didn't always agree, but I have to tell you, there are some people in this profession who I think really have made a mark and continue to, like across platforms. And you certainly are one of them. So it's a real honor for you to be here today.
What was it? It was December of last year. It was my last tape day. And, I had mixed, and I didn't have mixed feelings about leaving. It was time for me to leave. But I don't like the word retirement. And I don't consider myself in retirement. I think I'm in another phase of my life. I'm back doing what I love, which is to be in the good fight. And I consider you a comrade in arms in that good fight. And so I just finished reading an article about the state of juvenile justice in the nation. And the article began with that famous phrase that Martin Luther King made so popular. that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And in the article, there are a couple of different takes on the meaning of that, and whether, for example, whether we are closer to justice now. But there was also remarks by Eric Holder, former Attorney General Barack Obama, and he said, "Yes, indeed, the arc bends towards justice, but we have to pull it there, and that it doesn't happen on its own." And I think, to me, that's true. And I'm back in New York, and I'm trying to continue the good fight and to preserve the progress that we made in working with young people in trouble with the law. And when I say preserve, it's because it seems like in the last few years that there's a major effort afoot to roll back much of the progress that we made when I was sitting in Manhattan Supreme Court and the other advocates, which ultimately resulted, I don't know if I told you or you're aware, but it resulted in 2017, New York raised its age of criminal responsibility. Before 2017, we were only one of two states in the nation that prosecuted children as young as 16 automatically as adults, and children as young as 13 who were accused of serious crimes pursuant to the juvenile offender law. But in 2017, the legislature raised the age to 18. It didn't raise it across the board. There were still several exceptions, including the JOs, who were as young as 13 if they were accused of certain crimes, and as well as some of the 16 to 17-year-olds who were accused of felonies. And one thing that I'm particularly happy about and proud is that the legislation that raised the age to 18 institutionalized the concept of a youth park. As I presided over it or administered it and ran it, if you will, and required every county in New York, all 62 counties, to establish a youth park, very much like the youth park that we did in the adult court. And it was to be presided over specially trained and selected judges who were sensitive to the developmental needs of children.
Michael, just explain a little bit what youth part means.
Oh, yes.
So
yes,
folks who aren't in the system.
The youth parts were established as early as 1942 to separate the cases of minors from those of adults, and the processing of the cases of minors separate from adults. And so when New York enacted the juvenile offender law, by then, which was in 1978, by then there were very few youth parts left because the whole attitude about children who were getting into trouble and teenagers and adolescents had shifted from the idea that these were like the old Bowery Boy Hollywood movies, where the Bowery Boys would get into trouble and they'd be ushered into the chambers of a benign judge who would look at them and kind of try to deal with them in a humane fashion. That had changed dramatically over the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where we were getting tougher and tougher on young people who were committing crime, to the extent that we enacted the JO law, which let us try 13-year-olds automatically as adults. But now these young people were coming into the system and being arbitrarily assigned to any one of the 50 or so judges who were sitting in the criminal court. And to me, that didn't make sense. So in 1992, I reincarnated the idea of youth parks, which had been around since the early 40s, but were no longer really existent. And I persuaded my administrative judge to let me establish a youth park within the adult court to address the specific and different needs of young people who were now coming into, as young as 13, who are now coming into the adult court. Because I was never a juvenile court judge or a family court judge. I was, at that time, a Supreme Court judge, or acting as a Supreme Court judge, because I had been assigned by Governor Cuomo to be a court of claims judge, assigned specifically to the criminal courts.
What really stands out is how you saw the way young people were being adjudicated in the system. And even though there were these, parameters under which you had to do it, you still found a way to address some of the particular needs that are peculiar to young people, even as they were going through the adult system. And that really brings me to 1996, because you said before, no, of course you don't retire. You've had so many, even your TV career has had so many phases.
Right.
You had one set of judges, and I'm not going to, when you stop working with somebody and you see them working with new people, and you're like, no, they're really good too. Like your new team, Rachel and Yodit, the three of you. I will say we are special, but that's just me. You had such a nice chemistry with your new colleagues. So you had phase one of TV, you had another phase of TV, and then before that, you had a post-career on the bench where you were doing some really incredible things in New York, or I should say a post-bench career.
Right.
And then we have a moment before that where you are a sitting judge. And that really brings me to a story that you shared with me that I found very compelling, and it's been written about. Sorry, that's actually my mom calling. She'll be
I want you to interrupt
to know that
your mother.
I'm going to tell her it was you. She'll be so, she's going to send her love. Mom loves her some Michael Corriero. But let's go back to 1996 and when you are sitting on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And before you comes a young man who has pled guilty to a series of muggings that took place, that he admitted to having participated in when he was 15. So he pleads guilty. And I got to think that as a sitting judge in New York City during this moment in time, you're seeing a lot of young people come through your court. And a lot of young people who have done really harmful things. I mean, it wasn't just one mugging that King Hongwu pled guilty to. There were a series of muggings. And I don't think that anyone should ever give short shrift to what it is to be victimized. He shows up in your courtroom. What do you see in him? What's happening in your head as this young man is pleading guilty to these crimes?
I would like to tell the story because it brings me to that point. Who was he and who was I? And was it destiny that we would meet at that particular moment? You're right. It was 1996. He came before me. And in 2010, I had left the bench in 2008 and I to become the executive director of Big Brothers Big Sisters. In 2010, I got an email from King. Remember, 16 years had gone by. I had no idea who he was. It wasn't registered. But he sent me an email and he said, "Hey, Judge Corriero, I don't know if you remember me, but when I was 14, I appeared before you and I pled guilty. And you told me at the time that you sentenced me that if I did everything you said, you would stand behind me." Those are his exact words, that I would stand behind it. And I didn't remember. Thousands of kids came. So I reached out to my law clerk, Allison, at the time. And I said, "Allison," I said, "do you remember the case of King Hongwu?" And she says, "Well, no, Judge, but I'll get the transcript of the plea and when he appeared before us." She gave me the transcript and it refreshed my recollection. I remember coming out in the courtroom that particular day and looking out in the audience, and I saw several Chinese people. And the clerk said, Judge, we're waiting to call the case of King Ang-woo, but we can't call it until we get a Chinese interpreter for his parents. His mother was here, and his sister.
This is back in 1996.
96.
Now we're back in 1996.
Yeah.
So let me just to recap and make sure everybody's following. I started with this young man who you meet in your courtroom in 96. But you reminded us that we're actually starting in 2010, where he reaches out to you, and we'll understand why. He reaches out to you and says, Judge, I'm in some trouble. I don't know if you remember me. And then initially you're like, I'm not sure I do, but then you remember. And so now you're taking us back to 1996.
So I came out, we were waiting for the Chinese interpreter. And, like in most courtrooms, interpreters are rare, and sometimes you can wait for days to get the right interpreter. So I didn't wait. I'm kind of like I needed to do things. And I said to the lawyers, while we're waiting, come up and tell me a little bit about the case. And so the prosecutor came up and said, Judge, this young man committed a number of serious robberies in the Chinatown area, and that in one of the robberies he was with 2 or 3 other kids. One of the other teenagers punched an elderly man, and in another robbery they knocked down an elderly man, and they stole money from him. And we've indicted him for five robberies, but we didn't indict him all at once. So we indicted him for the first robbery, and he made bail, or he got out on bail on that robbery. And while out on bail for that robbery, committed another one. And the DA was kind of anticipating what I might be thinking. They said, you can't give this young person a second chance. You can't, get to special youthful offender treatment. We want 5 to 10 years for him. Now, the maximum for this, he was being prosecuted as a juvenile offender. He was facing, for robbery in the first degree, a minimum of 1 to 3, maximum of 3 1/3 to 10 years. But you could get consecutive time if it were for multiple individual crimes. And so since he had committed a number of crimes, the DA was asking for the maximum consecutive time that I could give him 5 to 10. His lawyer said, wait, Judge, you can't do that. This young man before these incidents had never been in trouble before. He was attending one of our schools in the Lower East Side. He was a straight A student. He was being picked on by a number of other kids. They were bullying him, and in order to protect himself, he associated with these other young Chinese boys, and they were kind of like a loosely knit gang. But he associated them simply to protect himself. Yes, they went out and they did these things, but Judge, he's never been convicted before. He gave me a number, the defense attorney. I think it was 2 to 6 or 1 to 3, or he may have even asked me for probation. But there was no way that I could get there, given the underlying facts in the case.
So when you say there's no way you could get there, do you mean there's no way, given the sentencing guidelines, you could get there, or there's no way that you, given your sensibilities toward juvenile rehabilitation, you just couldn't get there? Like, what's going through? What's your decisioning at this point?
What's going through my mind now is that here I have a young boy who had great potential. He had never been in trouble before, as I said. All of his teachers said that he was a model student, but it wasn't until he had been picked on that he kind of started falling by the wayside. And what was going through my mind is that I don't really have much of a choice in sentencing him, because the law had certain criteria that, if they were met, had to be followed. And the DA had met those criteria with respect to this case, in terms of crime and violence, in terms of committing another crime while out on bail. there was no way you could get to a sentence that might involve letting him out. It would have undermined what we were trying to do in terms of undermining the faith in the community, as you pointed out. When someone commits a crime of violence, age is a factor, but still you have to take into consideration the public's perception of what you're doing, and they'd lose respect for the law and lose respect for what we were trying to do. So I was upset that I was going to have to sentence this young man, and more importantly, that he would incur a felony conviction for what he had done. So we finally agreed that we're not going to go ahead with locating a Chinese interpreter, and that I was going to use his sister, who spoke English, to interpret for his mother. And we had agreed that I was going to sentence him to 3 to 9 years, a minimum of 3 years with a maximum of 9 years. And he automatically would incur a felony record for that conviction. I would plead to all the charges against him. But the total sentence would be 3 to 9. So he comes out, and I'm fired up, because here comes this young boy, never been convicted before. He's now before me, and it's my responsibility to impose this sentence, which by all accounts was a fair and reasonable sentence, and would mean that his whole life could be altered significantly by this event. Now, remember this. I asked the mother to come to the bench, and I wanted the sister to explain to her what was going to happen. And I told her that my hands are tied, that I'm going to have to incarcerate him, give him a sentence of incarceration because of the nature of the crime, and because while he was out on bail, he committed another crime. And as I was talking to her, she interrupted me, and he's sitting in the defendant's chair. She says, through the sister, Judge, I want you to understand that I came here with King when he was 5 years old from China. His father is not with us. I work more than 8 hours a day as a seamstress in a factory, and it's my fault he got into trouble because I couldn't, guide him because I was busy. I said, no, mother, it's not your fault. I said, it's your fault. I said, why do you think your mother came here? He said, to make a better life. I said, yes, for who? I said, for you. And look at what you've done. And he said, Judge, I'm going to make it up to her. Now he's crying. She's crying. And he says, I'm going to make it up to her. I said, you're going to make it up to her? I said, well, this is what you're going to do. You're going to get yourself educated while you're in the institution. You're going to get your high school diploma. You're going to get a college degree. You're going to go to work. And when you get out, you're going to take care of your family. And if you do that, I'll stand behind you. And there the words were in the record. I'll stand behind you. The very words that he sent back to me in that email.
As he stood there in your courtroom in 1996 and said and cried, and you're talking to mom through the interpreter, it's something else is happening, which is you're kind of seeing something of yourself in him.
My mother was a seamstress as well. I grew up in Little Italy. He hung out in a video game parlor when he wasn't in school or whatever he was doing. I hung out in a candy store, and by night it was more or less a after-hour club in Little Italy. I managed to escape getting into severe trouble, but I understood how easily a careless choice could alter the course of your life. So I was looking at him and feeling a kind of empathy, recognizing that this is the classic situation that I've been dealing with, and felt that I completely frustrated by what I could do and what I couldn't do. And so I took that frustration out in the rhetoric that I was using. And I didn't want him to leave my courtroom without thinking that his life was over. I wanted to find a way to tell this intelligent young boy who is capable of crying, capable of accepting the responsibility for what he did, and recognizing that he did have a responsibility to his mother and made great sacrifices for him. And I just couldn't leave it as I'm sentencing you to 3 to 6 years, and that's the. I wanted to kind of turn on a little light bulb on the side of him and say that if you do all these, I'm going to stand behind you. Somehow, I didn't realize what it totally meant, but I felt that somehow I had to let him know that he has something to work toward, and that this wasn't the end of his life. It was simply the beginning of another phase, if you will. And he had it within his power to make a better life for himself and his family.
So in 1996, you sentenced him, and you sentenced him to how long?
3 to 9 years.
And
that means he had to do 3 years in the juvenile institution, and he could be released at the end of 3 years if he followed all of the rules, or he could stay in for 6 years and then be released and have 3 years of probation. So it was an indeterminate sentence.
So what happens when he's incarcerated? What's his prison record like?
In his email, he goes on, he says, Judge, I would want you to know I did everything you asked me. I performed well in the institution, so well that they let me out at the minimum. I got my high school diploma there. I went on to college. I got a degree in data processing. I got my first job with the PBA, Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, as a data entry specialist with them. I went on to perfect my skills. I got a job in a real estate firm, and I've become the vice president of IT for a major real estate firm in New York City. My mother last year got her American citizenship because they gave the test in Chinese. And so she went and she took it and she became a citizen. So I thought it would be a good idea if I were to become a citizen. So I went to the immigration department, and they asked me a series of questions. And one of them was that had I ever been in trouble before? And I said, yes. When I was 14, I appeared before Judge Corriero or whatever. And I was sentenced. I did my sentence, and I'm out, and I've not been in trouble since then. They told me to come back in 2 weeks. I left. I came back in 2 weeks. They put me in handcuffs. They took me to Jersey in a detention center, and I am being held without bail, and I'm awaiting mandatory deportation to China. Judge, I don't understand. I did everything you said, and I'm being deported to China. I don't even speak Chinese well, Judge. I have no idea what life is like in China. New York is my home, and I was angry, but nevertheless, I was proud that this kid had rebuilt his life.
So let's make sure that everybody sort of gets the beats that led him from your courtroom, a model incarceration period, and then ending up back in handcuffs. You tell this young man, you do the right thing, I'll stand by you.
Right.
He does the right thing. He serves the minimum amount of time because he's been a very good inmate. He gets an education. He's got a good job. His mother decides to become a citizen, and he says, you know what? I'm going to do that too. So by applying for citizenship, he triggers a provision in a law, in immigration law, that was enacted in 1996.
Ironically, the same year he came before me.
Same year he's before
Right.
you. So in 1996, there's a new immigration bill that's passed that results in this kid being arrested because there's a mandatory deportation
for felons
for felons,
violent crimes.
And no, this never would have happened. It would not have been triggered had he not tried to apply for citizenship,
Precisely.
which is something that he did after building an investment in the system and doing what you told him to do. Do better. He did better. He wants to become an American. And because of this bill and because of his felony, he ends up being arrested and is subject to mandatory deportation, which is why he's now writing you in 2010 saying, you said you were going to have my back. So here you go.
So his lawyers reached out to me and they asked me to write a letter in support of King. And they wanted initially to use the letter to present to the district attorney to get the district attorney to consider retroactively giving him what we call youthful offender treatment, which was not available to him because of the nature of the offense and how it was committed when he appeared before me. The district attorney refused to do that.
So that would have made it not a felony.
That would have made it not a felony.
That would have made it not a felony.
If you receive youthful offender treatment, it substitutes for the felony conviction. And the district attorney wouldn't go along with that because, according to them, it would open the door to a lot of other applications. And they didn't want to be responsible for that. So now the only option available to him was a pardon. Short of a pardon, he was going to be deported to China. And there was no way that he was getting out on bail until he was deported because of the arbitrariness and the draconian nature of an immigration violation. Even though he had paid his debt to society and had really succeeded in becoming a constructive member of society. So I write a letter to the then governor, David Paterson, and I explain all of this to him, how he appeared before me and how he had done everything that I had asked of him, everything that society would have asked for him. And now what are we doing? The last time I saw him, he was in my courtroom, he was in tears, and his mother is in tears. And now the system, I think, is in tears. And in this case, cries out for some kind of justice. And frankly, I didn't have much confidence that the governor was going to give a pardon because this is not the way the system works, unfortunately. This case, somehow his lawyers get the attention of Nina Bernstein of the New York Times. And she writes this incredible article, which she titles, "Judge Keeps His Word, the Immigrant Who Kept His." And it's on I think it's on the front fold of the New York Times.
February 18th, 2010.
Absolutely. And this article sparked an incredible response from those that read it about the insanity of these immigration laws that didn't provide any discretion or individual consideration. They're senseless in many ways. He had letters from all of his employers saying a kid like this doesn't come along but once in every 10 years. He was so dedicated to his work. He was so reliable. And we were now sending him off to China instead of keeping him as the valuable employee that they had seen and worked with. So she wrote this article, and about a week after the article, she called me and she said, "Judge, do you remember the case of King Hong-Woo?" I said, "Yes." And when you get a call from a reporter and you're a judge, and you get a little bit of a little hesitation because you don't know where this is going. I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "And you were the judge who sentenced him?" I said, yes, I did. Yes, I am the judge who sentenced him. And I think he deserves a pardon. She said, "Well, I agree, and I'm going to do all I can to help to see that he gets it." And that's when she wrote, as a matter of fact, that's when she wrote the article, "Judge Keeps His Word, He Kept His." But it sparked this incredible response from the public. The internet was just taking off, and people were writing about it. There was a petition that was out on the internet that people were signing on to. About a month later, I got a call from the DA's office that the governor was seriously considering a pardon for him, and that I should stay available in case someone wants to speak to me within the next week or so. No one really reached out to me at that point, but in fact, the governor did pardon him. And I was there. I was invited to his swearing in as a U.S. citizen. And to me, it was a case that there's a social worker phrase, case to cause. And it was King's case that made it perfectly clear to me about what I should be doing in my next phase of my career. And that was to be an advocate, to change the laws, to increase discretion and flexibility in the application of these laws. And I left Big Brothers and I created the New York Center for Juvenile Justice.
And when you think about that moment in 96, Michael, when you tell King, you tell this kid that you're going to stand by him if he turns his life around. What made you say that out loud? Because you're the judge, people are going to hear it. And when you say it, then it really instead of saying, I'm going to maybe keep an eye on this kid.
Right.
What made you feel the need to pronounce that to him?
I just felt that he needed to know that I understood how he felt now after being arrested, after losing the opportunity to graduate high school, after disappointing his mother and all around, and not knowing what was ahead of him. And I just felt he needed that assurance that someone really is going to be taking note of what I'm doing, and this someone represents authority.
You make this commitment to him. You then follow up on it, which for anybody who knows you or who has seen you, that's not at all surprising. But what's really, I think, inspiring is how you use this system to really advocate for some changes in the system. Because, what does it feel like the same kid who followed your advice, you said, turn your life around. Your mother busted her ass to get to this country, not so you could be a screw up in court, but so you could actually make something of yourself. So he does that. And not only does he do it, he says, not only am I going to make something of myself, but I'm going to double down on my investment in this great country. And then all of a sudden, his categorization changes from, reformed person to criminal alien. How did you sit with that? You're like, because he did what I told him to do, he's now in more jeopardy than he would have been if he had just come out, stayed under the radar and done some shady stuff that nobody else ever heard about.
I was proud of him initially, but I was also really angry, righteous anger, if I can characterize it that way. And I was going to do, by then I was off the bench, and I was going to, even if I was on the bench and I got that email, I was going to do that because I gave him my word. That also was important to me, that he realized that if I give you my word, I keep it, and you give me your word, you keep it. And it was that bond, if you will. And in many ways, he was me and I was him at his age. And it could have been me, could have been my mother saying it was her fault because she worked.
Well, and look how you turned out, Judge Corriero.
Well, I'm an adult delinquent. but Anita Bernstein was so eloquent in her article that she made the connections initially about the kind of parallel in our lives. Right. I went to grammar school in Chinatown, so I knew the Chinese community. I knew that that family was so important to them, and why coming here was so important when his mother came, and why education was the only way, was the only avenue to get out. And this kid was a poster child for everything that I was trying to do. People would say, "Oh, Judge Corriero, you're what was the term that everybody was using about judges like me? That we were political activists, or what? What was
activist judges?
Activist judges." And I said, "No, I'm not an activist judge, but I do find the spaces in the law to do what is right." And to me, that was the challenge, because the law, as it was written, was very restrictive in the options available to the court in terms of alternative to incarceration programs. And so when I created the youth part and the youth part process, I did it in such a way where I would give the young people that came before me, who perhaps didn't, at the moment that they appeared before me, have that trajectory, but I wanted to give them an opportunity to earn a second chance. And I would do it by monitoring them, by mentoring them when I could, by making sure that they did everything that I said that they should do. Because if they didn't, if they fouled up, if they hurt anybody while they were under my supervision, then the youth part would be over. The youth part was really, I was there at the whim and caprice of understanding administrative judges. But if I exercised poor judgment, the youth part would have just evaporated, because we're always under fire for dealing with young people as developmentally different from adults.
The young people who had the benefit of this sort of consideration really had to take it seriously. And you told them that if you mess up, then this whole thing goes away. So you don't get to mess up. And that's exactly, and King took your advice. King Hong-Woo took your advice. What's the last conversation that you had with him? What's the last thing he ever said to you after the pardon, which he did secure?
We had dinner.
You were at his citizenship ceremony. Yeah. He's now an American citizen. He's now an American citizen. What's the last conversation you had with him?
I remember we talked about what he was thinking of in terms of his future. And, he couldn't leave the country during the 15 years that he had gotten out, because had he left, he wasn't a citizen. He would have never been able to come back. So he was thinking about doing kind of visiting places he wanted to visit, and was imagining his future. And I think we were both aware that there were no more boundaries. There were no more barriers to him becoming the best person he could become. There were no more limitations, and that he could become whatever he wanted. He was not only free from jail, but he was free to be. And that was our kind of celebration with each other. And it was an affirmation. It was an affirmation of everything that I was trying to do for others, because I feel so very fortunate. Because if you had seen me at 14 or 15, you would never have imagined that one day I would grow up to be a judge. If anything, I was going to be before a judge. I was on that trajectory. I felt that it was because of my good fortune that I had to share it as best I could with other young people who were born into poverty, if you will. My mother, as you know, was a seamstress. She didn't have any insurance or anything like. She worked for one of these companies that they characterized her as an independent contractor, so she wouldn't get Social Security or anything. My father didn't have a steady job until he was over 30. And then he did the work of a dock worker. We lived in a 3-room tenement on the 5th floor, across the street, literally across the street from the criminal court building, the tombs. I always say I didn't go very far in life. I went from my building across the street to the courthouse. My grandmother was a cleaning lady for the courts. And I would imagine when I went into a courtroom that I was sitting, or chambers of a judge, that I was sitting in chambers that my grandmother had cleaned. And so all of this, perhaps, maybe it was magical thinking or whatever, but in many ways it was kind of karma and destiny.
It's certainly also this. It is an example of someone who lived some things using the experience of those things to go to battle for somebody else. And because you went to battle for King Hong Wu, and because he did what he was supposed to do and took responsibility for both the bad choices and then made a lot of much better ones, he has the freedom to be. And you
Right.
are part of the reason that
And
happened.
it wasn't that, and he wasn't given by any means a lenient sentence. So it isn't as if we were, it was always a struggle to have people understand that what I was trying to do was not out of a sense of leniency, out of a sense of, in a way, practicality. Because if we could reach, I always talk about in terms of, unfortunately, there are some young offenders that have to be incarcerated because we don't yet have the knowledge or the authority to do anything different. But when it comes to young people, as opposed to adults, and you confining them for any period of time in an institution, the purpose of that confinement should be education. It should be with a view of what is this young person going to be when he leaves and walks out the door after 4 years. Because the recidivism rate for kids who are locked up for a 30 days, 60 days, 90 days is incredibly different than kids who are given an opportunity to earn a second chance through an alternative incarceration. The recidivism rate was 60 to 80% of the kids who were sent off to the Office of Juvenile Detention, which was a state institution. 60 to 90% of them were rearrested within 36 months of their release. Why?
Wow.
Because in the institution they weren't educated. They came out worse in many instances than before we put them. So yes, there are certain kids that do things that are terrible, and they need to be kept away from the community as long as is just. But while they're away, we should be doing all we can with all we know to try and educate them so that when they come out, they're no longer as dangerous as when they went in.
Judge Michael Corriero, you have done a lot to make.
Well, we're not finished.
We're not done yet.
You're
not done yet, but you've certainly moved the needle in terms of making justice more effective. And when I say that, I certainly want to echo your point. It's not about being lenient. It's about being effective. And if you've got a young person who needs to go to jail, and sorry, there are a lot of them that do, there are some of them that do, we need to make sure that while there, we are doing something other than just producing better criminals.
Right.
So that's the work that you've been doing. That's the work you're continuing to do. And you've moved the needle on that so fantastically. So thank you for your work. Thank you for caring about justice.
Thank you for letting me talk about it.
You miss TV? Do you miss television?
I miss you. I don't miss
heart.
No, I don't miss TV. I'm really happy. 10 years traveling back and forth to California. No, I don't. No, I was ready to come back. I'm very energized by being back in juvenile justice now in New York, because unfortunately the pendulum is swinging back to a more punitive, unthinkingly punitive approach to dealing with young people. And so we have to do all we can to preserve the progress we made and continue forward with it.
Welcome to your next chapter, Michael.
Thank you very much. Have me back.
Thanks. You will be back here. You know you're going to come back.
In a couple of months. Well,
absolutely.
Maybe we can find another king to talk about.
Deal. I bet we will. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for being here. I miss you too. You're the best, Michael.
Be good.